Close your eyes for a moment and imagine this. You wake up in a bed that isn't yours. The ceiling above you is cracked, stained yellow by decades of leaking pipes. A faint buzzing echoes through the walls. Not lights, not machines, but something that feels alive, crawling just beneath the surface. You try to move, but the air is heavy. The smell of rust and medicine clings to your lungs. Somewhere down the hall, a door slams shut. Though this hospital has been abandoned for 50 years, you tell yourself it's the wind, but then you hear it. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, drawing closer. Your pulse quickens. You want to run, but every direction looks the same. Endless hallways, peeling wallpaper, the ghost of names scratched into the walls. You aren't just in an empty building. You are inside the memories of everyone who ever suffered here. Their screams don't fade with time. They echo. They cling. And once you step into these halls, the story does not let you leave. Because hospitals like these were never truly abandoned. They were built with good intentions. At least, that's what the architects claimed. Long brick corridors, high ceilings, windows positioned to let the light pour in, all designed to heal the mind, to comfort the body, to offer a refuge for those who had been cast aside by society. The 19th and early 20th centuries believed in progress. They believed in science. They believed that madness could be cured if only it was isolated, controlled, and studied. But history tells a different story. Imagine standing at the gates of one of these institutions in the early 1900s. The iron bars rise above you, blackened by rain and rust. Families arrived in horse-drawn wagons, later in motor cars, bringing sons and daughters, brothers and wives. Many believed they were delivering their loved ones into the hands of compassionate doctors. But some knew better. They knew these gates were not simply doors of entry. They were points of no return. The asylums were built away from cities, placed on hillsides or deep in the countryside. Out of sight, out of mind. Their distance created a psychological barrier as much as a physical one. If you were sent there, you weren't expected to come back. It was easier for the family to forget, and easier for society to look away. Inside, the world operated by different rules. Patients became numbers. Their lives were filed away in ledgers, names reduced to ink, existence reduced to records. Once a person walked through those doors, the outside world ceased to matter. They belonged not to their family, but to the institution itself. Hospitals and asylums of this era were enormous, sprawling complexes, hundreds of rooms, endless wings, underground tunnels connecting one building to the next. They were designed for efficiency, but there was something unsettling in their size. The larger they grew, the easier it became for an individual to disappear inside, and disappear they did. Patients who spoke too much, who protested, who begged to leave, were silenced. Sedated, locked in padded cells. Some received treatments that sound barbaric now, but were considered progressive then. Hydrotherapy, insulin shock, lobotomies. Imagine being strapped into a chair as ice-cold water poured over your body for hours. Imagine a doctor driving a long steel instrument through your eye socket into your brain, all in the name of science. These were not isolated cases. They were routine. They were sanctioned. And they were applauded by the medical establishment of the time. It is easy, looking back, to shudder. To ask how doctors could have done such things, how families could have allowed it. But fear has a way of bending morality. Mental illness was terrifying to the society of the early 20th century. It was misunderstood. People believed it spread like a disease, that madness itself was contagious. To send someone away was not just treatment. It was protection. Protection for the family, for the neighbors, for the very fabric of civilization. And so the asylum swelled. By the 1930s and 40s, some hospitals housed thousands of patients, entire populations crammed into decaying wards. Beds lined hallways, stairwells, even storage rooms. Overcrowding bred filth. Disease spread faster than cures. What began as temples of healing transformed into prisons of despair. Walk the corridors of these institutions in your mind. Feel the weight of the air. Every sound echoes. The metallic clank of doors, the rattle of gurneys, the muffled cries of the restrained. At night, silence was never complete. Whispers drifted through the wards. Screams punctured the dark, and somewhere, always, the sound of footsteps that didn't belong to you. Doctors justified their work by the language of progress. They claimed to be pioneers in understanding the mind, but many patients were not ill at all. Some were simply inconvenient. Women labeled hysterical for refusing to obey their husbands, orphans with no family, men who had broken under the pressure of war. Poverty, disobedience, even eccentricity could be a ticket to lifelong confinement. Hospitals built for healing became warehouses for society's unwanted. And in that transformation, something darker took root. It is said that buildings absorb the emotions of those who live within them, that walls hold memories. Step into one of these hospitals today and you can feel it. A density in the air, a heaviness pressing against your skin. The despair never left. The screams never faded. They are etched into the concrete, burned into the rust, soaked into the plaster like a stain that cannot be washed away. This is why abandoned hospitals carry a presence unlike any other ruins. Castles may be majestic, factories may be haunting, but hospitals are alive in a different way. They remember pain. They remember confinement. They remember the thousands of minds that unraveled inside. The rise of these hospitals was not just a medical experiment. It was a cultural one, a test of how far society was willing to go to hide its fears, to bury its problems. And while the institutions promised healing, they delivered isolation. While they promised compassion, they delivered control. And when the doors finally shut, when the patients were released or left behind, the buildings themselves did not forget. They stand today not as monuments to progress, but as mausoleums of suffering. Step close to their gates, and you feel it, that same sense of no return. Step inside, and the weight of history presses against your chest. For these hospitals were never just buildings. They were cages of the mind, and the echoes inside them have no intention of letting go. The end did not come all at once. For decades, the hospitals continued their routines. Doctors in white coats making their rounds, nurses pushing carts of medicine, patients confined to their beds or pacing the wards. But slowly, society began to change. Words like compassion, rights, and freedom began to seep into public consciousness. Newspapers reported overcrowding. Families whispered of abuses. Investigations uncovered horrors that could no longer be hidden. By the 1960s and 70s, the tide had turned. Reformers demanded that the hospitals be shut down. New medications promised that patients could be treated outside the walls. Politicians promised dignity, humanity, something better than endless confinement. And so, one by one, the doors closed. But the closing of an asylum was never clean. It was never gentle. Picture it, the day of abandonment. Patients gathered in hallways, waiting for buses that would never come. Some were released into cities with nothing but a paper bag and a diagnosis no one understood. Others were transferred, shuffled to facilities already overflowing. Many were simply forgotten, lost in the shuffle of bureaucracy. And the buildings? They stood empty. Their purpose gone, their rooms stripped of meaning, their hallways stretching into silence. At first, the emptiness was sterile, almost clean. Beds were stacked, files were boxed, lights were switched off. But time has a way of unraveling order. Rain seeped through broken roofs, vines crawled through windows, paint blistered and peeled like skin. The air grew heavy with mold and dust. Yet even in decay, the hospitals did not feel abandoned. Walk through one today and you understand. The rooms are empty, but you are never alone. Every corner feels occupied. Every hallway seems to breathe. The silence is not silence at all. It hums, low and steady, as if the walls themselves are alive. Some objects were left behind. Wheelchairs rust in corners, their leather seats cracked and split. Surgical tools lie scattered across tables, gleaming faintly beneath layers of dust. Cabinets still hold bottles of medicine, their labels faded, their contents crystallized into strange alien shapes. In children's wards, toys sit abandoned, dolls with cracked porcelain faces, teddy bears missing their eyes, the kind of details that should be innocent, but instead feel monstrous in their stillness. Urban explorers describe the sensation of stepping into a time capsule, a world frozen in its last gasp. But the strangest thing is not what you see, it's what you feel. The weight of memory clings to you, thick as cobwebs. These hospitals were not simply emptied. They were left to rot with everything inside. The memories, the emotions, the suffering. And suffering lingers. Abandonment magnifies it. A scream echoes longer in an empty room. A shadow stands out sharper in the half-light. The absence of life becomes its own presence. The mind fills the void with its darkest imaginings. But some things are not imagination. Investigators who enter these ruins often describe the same sensations. Sudden drops in temperature, the sound of footsteps following them, the feeling of hands brushing their arms when no one is there. Cameras malfunction. Batteries drain without explanation. Microphones record whispers that were never heard in the moment. Skeptics will say it's suggestion, the power of fear over the mind. But is fear enough to explain why so many different people, in so many different hospitals, report the same phenomena? The same footsteps, the same whispers, the same shadows slipping just out of view. There is a theory among paranormal researchers that trauma leaves an imprint, that the energy of extreme suffering does not fade when the body dies, but seeps into the very walls of a building. Stone, wood, and steel become sponges, soaking up human misery until they can hold no more. When you enter, you disturb it, like dust rising from a forgotten floor. The past stirs, and it notices you. Whether you believe this or not, you cannot deny the feeling. Walk through an abandoned hospital at night and the atmosphere presses against you like a weight. The air is too thick, the silence is too loud. Your mind begins to play tricks, but deep down, you know it's not only your mind. Something else is there, something watching, something remembering. Abandonment turned these hospitals into something worse than prisons. Prisons at least are meant to be occupied. These buildings are not. Their emptiness becomes their power. Every object left behind feels intentional, as if placed to remind you of what once happened there. Every door that creaks open feels like an invitation you should never accept. And yet, people go. Explorers, thrill seekers, researchers. They enter these ruins with cameras and flashlights, searching for proof. Some find nothing, some never return. And some come back with stories that haunt them for the rest of their lives. But perhaps the strangest truth is this: the hospitals never truly close. They stand in fields, in forests, in forgotten corners of cities. Their windows are broken, their roofs are caving in, their walls are covered in graffiti. But they remain, they wait, they endure. Because while medicine may move on, while society may forget, the buildings do not. They remember everything. And when you step inside, they want you to remember too. Creepiest abandoned hospitals. Worldwide. There are abandoned hospitals scattered all over the world, each with its own scars, each with its own story. But some of them are different. Some refuse to simply rot in silence. They whisper, they echo, they pull you inside and refuse to let you leave the same person you were when you entered. These are the hospitals where history, trauma, and legend merge into one overwhelming presence. Let's step into them, one by one. But remember, once you walk these halls in your mind, they have a way of following you back home. Penhurst Asylum, Pennsylvania, USA. The gates of Penhurst are rusted now, strangled by vines. The buildings sag beneath their own weight, roofs collapsed, windows shattered. But in the early 20th century, Penhurst was not a ruin, it was a promise. A state school for the feeble-minded, a place where society claimed it could help those who did not fit into its neat categories. But Penhurst quickly became a nightmare. Overcrowding was immediate. Designed for a few hundred, it held thousands. Children slept on bare floors, their small bodies lined against each other in endless rows. Staff were overwhelmed, beaten down by the sheer number of patients. Abuse crept in, first quiet, then loud, then systematic. Step into the children's ward today and the silence crushes you. Toys lie abandoned, their faces broken, their eyes watching. Cribs sit empty, yet the air still carries the faint sound of crying. Paranormal investigators report hearing voices here, children whispering, sometimes laughing, sometimes screaming. And sometimes, if you stand still long enough, you feel a tug at your clothes, as if a small hand is trying to hold on. Penhurst was not just abandoned, it was exposed. Journalists revealed the conditions, the filth, the beatings, the neglect. The world recoiled, and when the doors finally shut, the trauma stayed behind. Walk the tunnels beneath Penhurst, once used to move patients in secret, and you may find yourself hearing footsteps that match your own, but out of rhythm, as if someone is following. Waverly Hills Sanatorium, Kentucky, USA. On a hill outside Louisville sits one of the most infamous hospitals in the world, Waverly Hills. In the early 1900s, tuberculosis swept through America like a plague. There was no cure. The only hope was fresh air, sunlight, and rest. And so Waverly Hills was built, a massive Gothic structure where the sick could be isolated, treated, and often left to die. Tens of thousands entered. Thousands never left. Death was constant here, so constant that the staff built a tunnel, a hidden chute that carried bodies down the hill to waiting wagons. It was called the body chute. Patients never saw it. Doctors feared that if they realized how many were dying, they would lose hope. Walk through that tunnel today, and the air clings to your skin, wet and suffocating. Explorers report seeing shadows at the far end that never move closer, never step into the light. Voices echo here, low and mournful. Some say they've felt hands push them from behind. Others say they've heard coughing, ragged and desperate, in a hospital that hasn't treated patients in decades. Waverly Hills is more than abandoned. It is saturated with death. Every wall remembers. Every corridor hums with a low vibration, like the sound of breathing in the dark. Stand at the top floor at night, and you may see figures at the windows, waiting, watching, still trapped in their final moments. Belitz-Heilstätten Hospital, Germany. Outside Berlin, hidden in thick forests, lies Belitz-Heilstätten. It is a sprawling medical complex, a maze of decaying red brick buildings swallowed by vines and moss. Built as a tuberculosis sanatorium in the late 1800s, it later became a military hospital treating soldiers through 2 world wars. Among its patients was a young Adolf Hitler, who recovered here after being wounded in 1916. The buildings are rotting now, ceilings collapsed, floors unstable, but the air is not empty. Soldiers died here in agony. Patients coughed out their lives here. During the Cold War, it became a Soviet hospital, and the secrets of that era are etched into its walls as well. Explorers who enter Belitz speak of an oppressive silence, broken by sudden, inexplicable sounds. Boots echoing down hallways, doors slamming without wind. Shadows drift across doorways, then vanish. The surgical rooms are the worst. Rusted tables still stand in the center, their surfaces pitted and scarred. Instruments lie scattered, frozen in mid-use. And some say that if you stand too long in these rooms, you feel a sharp pain in your chest, as if the hospital itself remembers what was done there, and wants you to remember too. Ospedale di Volterra, Italy. In the hills of Tuscany lies Volterra, once one of Italy's most notorious psychiatric hospitals. From the outside it looks almost beautiful. Faded yellow walls, arched windows, the romantic decay of Italian architecture. But inside, it is a prison of the mind. Volterra was infamous not for its treatments, but for its silences. Patients lived in near total isolation. Many were forgotten, abandoned by families who never returned. But the strangest relic of Volterra is not its walls or its wards. It is its words. One patient spent years scratching into the plaster of the hospital, covering the walls with nearly 100,000 words. His writings climb the walls, spilling across ceilings and doors, a desperate attempt to be remembered. Even today, the words remain, etched deep, impossible to erase. Visitors describe the feeling of being surrounded, watched not by eyes, but by language itself, as if the building is whispering to you through its walls. The words are incoherent, fragmented, obsessive, but together they form something more unsettling, a portrait of a mind unraveling in captivity. People who visit often say they hear scratching even now, as if the writing has never stopped. Severals Hospital, England. In Essex, England, Severals psychiatric hospital stands in ruins. Opened in 1913, it became infamous for its use of lobotomies and electroconvulsive therapy. Patients here were often admitted for the smallest reasons: depression, poverty, disobedience. Once inside, their chances of leaving were almost non-existent. Severals burned in the 1990s, and much of it lies charred and gutted. But what remains is enough to unnerve even the bravest explorers. Corridors twist into darkness, peeling paint falling in sheets. Rooms still hold rusted bed frames, scorched walls, and abandoned files. But Several's reputation comes from its hauntings. Shadows have been seen crossing hallways. A woman's scream has been heard echoing through the empty wards. Some say they've seen figures in patient gowns drifting between rooms. Others report waking from fainting spells inside the hospital with vivid memories of treatments that happened half a century ago. It is as if Severals does not simply haunt, it reenacts. It pulls you into its history, forcing you to relive the fear of those who never escaped. Why these hospitals stay with us. Each of these places shares something in common. They were built to heal, but became places of suffering. And when they were abandoned, that suffering didn't fade. It crystallized. It became part of the architecture. You can look at photographs of these places and feel it. The claustrophobia, the despair, the sense of being watched. You don't need to be there in person. The images alone carry weight, because they are not just ruins. They are memories carved into brick and stone. And perhaps that is why so many people are drawn to them. Not just for the thrill, not just for the ghost stories, but because they are mirrors. They show us the thin line between help and harm, between care and cruelty, between life and something much darker. When you step into one of these hospitals, in reality or even just in your imagination, you do not simply visit. You participate. You awaken the memories. You stir the whispers. And you carry them with you long after you leave. Because in places like these, the story never ends. The ghost stories hospitals are supposed to be places of order, of science, of medicine. But when you strip away the doctors and the patients, when you silence the machines and darken the halls, something else stirs. Something older. Something that does not obey the laws of medicine or reason. The stories begin quietly, whispered among explorers, caretakers, even police officers called to check break-ins. They do not start with screams. They start with small things. A door slamming when the air is still. A light flickering in a building without power. Footsteps pacing overhead when you know you are alone. At first, you explain them away. A draft. Old wiring. The creak of settling wood. But as you stay longer, the explanations stop working. The noises grow louder. The shadows grow bolder. And then you understand. The building is aware of you. Shadows that watch. The most common story is of shadows. They appear in the corners of rooms, stretched thin against the walls, darker than they should be. They move when you do not. They wait when you stop. They watch. At Waverly Hills Sanatorium, countless visitors describe seeing figures at the end of long hallways, tall, featureless shapes that stand silently before slipping out of sight. Some walk toward them, thinking it is another explorer, only to find the hall completely empty. Others freeze, unable to move, convinced that if they take one more step, the shadow will come closer. Shadows are the mind's first warning. Something is here, something that does not belong. The voices in the dark. Then there are the voices. They rarely speak clearly. Most often they are whispers, fragments of words, too low to understand, but impossible to ignore. They brush against your ears like a breath, close enough to make your skin crawl. At Penhurst, investigators have captured recordings of children's laughter, high, sharp, out of place in a building abandoned for decades. Others have heard cries, moans, even their own names whispered back to them. The strangest reports come when groups explore together. One person hears nothing, while another hears a sentence whispered directly into their ear. But when they compare later, the words are the same. The voices do not care whether you believe. they speak anyway. The residual hauntings. Some say the ghosts of hospitals do not interact at all. They simply repeat, endlessly, like a record stuck on a loop. Nurses still making their rounds. Patients still crying out for help. Doors still opening and closing in the same rhythm they always did. This is called a residual haunting. The energy of trauma burns so deep into the walls that it replays itself. You cannot stop it. You cannot change it. You can only witness it. At Balitz Heilstätten, visitors often hear the sound of boots marching in unison, long after the Soviet soldiers left. The rhythm is unmistakable, heavy, ordered, relentless. It does not falter. It does not fade. It simply continues as though the soldiers are still on patrol, locked in time. Residual or not, these hauntings feel alive. Because when you stand in those halls and hear them, you realize you are not observing history. You are inside it, the intelligent presences. And then there are the others, the ones that are not memories, not echoes, but aware. They respond, they notice, they act. At Severals in England, multiple explorers report the same phenomenon, being touched. A hand brushing across the back of the neck, fingers pulling at hair, cold pressure against arms and shoulders. Some claim to have been pushed, hard enough to stumble. Others say they have woken on the floor, confused, with no memory of how they fell. These are not echoes. They are encounters. Something in the building sees you as an intruder and reacts. Perhaps the most chilling stories come from Ospedale di Volterra in Italy, where the walls are carved with words. Explorers say that when they read the writings aloud, they hear scratching, faint at first, then louder, closer, until it seems to come from inside the walls themselves. Some describe feeling watched not by eyes, but by the words themselves, as though the language has become alive, studying you in return. The children who never left. There is something uniquely unsettling about the ghosts of children. Their innocence, their fragility, their unfinished lives make their presence more disturbing than any angry spirit. At Penhurst, shadowy figures of small children have been seen darting across hallways, peeking from behind doors, giggling in the distance. Some investigators leave toys in the wards. Balls, dolls, teddy bears. Cameras have recorded these objects moving on their own, rolling, tipping, shifting in ways that cannot be explained. One story tells of a music box placed on the floor of an empty room. The explorers left the room silent. When they returned minutes later, the music was playing, faint and haunting, echoing through the ward. What is more frightening? The possibility that children's spirits are still trapped in those ruins, or that something far older, far darker, is imitating them. The patient who still screams at Waverly Hills. There are stories of room 502. Legend says a nurse was found hanging there, her body swaying from the light fixture. Some claim she killed herself after discovering she was pregnant and unmarried. Others say she was driven mad by the endless deaths surrounding her. Visitors report seeing her figure, standing in the doorway, silent and still. Others say they've heard screams, long, piercing, echoing through the 5th floor. And some insist that when you enter room 502, you feel an overwhelming pressure, a sudden urge to leave, as though the room itself does not want you there. Whatever happened in that room, it has not ended. It repeats. It waits. It consumes. The unfinished treatments. Severals and other psychiatric hospitals hold a darker kind of haunting. The echoes of treatments that today we recognize as cruelty. Lobotomies performed with crude tools. Electroshock delivered without anesthesia. Patients strapped to beds for hours, days, years. Explorers tell of walking through treatment rooms and suddenly feeling searing pain in their heads, a jolt in their spines, the choking pressure of restraints. These sensations come without warning and leave without explanation. Are they tricks of the mind, fueled by suggestion? Or are they transmissions, the body remembering what the walls themselves have recorded? Why the ghosts remain. Skeptics insist that all of these stories can be explained by psychology, by the brain's tendency to invent patterns in the dark, by the power of suggestion. And yes, fear can make us see things that aren't there. But what if fear is not creating the ghosts? What if fear is simply making us sensitive enough to notice them? Think of it this way. Hospitals are places where thousands of people suffered, struggled, and died. Trauma that deep does not vanish. It stains, it imprints, it embeds itself into the foundation. Maybe the ghosts are not souls trapped between worlds. Maybe they are the memories of pain itself, repeating, searching for release. Or maybe they are something else. Something that feeds on the fear these buildings generate. Something that thrives on being remembered. Either way, when you enter an abandoned hospital, you're not just stepping into an empty building. You are stepping into a presence. A place that remembers. A place that watches. The real haunting. The strangest thing about these ghost stories is how they follow you home. People who visit abandoned hospitals often say the activity does not end when they leave. They hear footsteps in their own hallways. They see shadows in their own bedrooms. They wake in the night to whispers that were never there before. It is as if the hospital sends something back with you, a fragment of memory, a shadow, a voice. Something that wants to remind you that once you have entered, you never truly leave. And perhaps that is the truest ghost story of all. Because ghosts are not always trapped in buildings. Sometimes they are trapped in us. Why do we keep coming back? Think about it. There are ruins everywhere in the world. Old castles, forgotten factories, empty houses. And yet, nothing draws us quite like an abandoned hospital. Nothing captures our imagination quite like the hallways of a psychiatric ward left to rot, or the skeletal remains of a sanatorium decaying on a hill. It's not just curiosity. It's not just thrill-seeking. It's something deeper. Something almost primal. Abandoned hospitals are mirrors, and when we stare into them, we are staring into the darkest corners of ourselves. The place where life meets death. Hospitals are liminal spaces, thresholds between two worlds. They are built for one purpose: to fight death. Every hallway, every room, every machine inside exists to keep life going for as long as possible. But walk into an abandoned hospital, and you are walking into a place where that purpose has failed, where life ended, where death won. That contradiction hits us on a level we cannot ignore. The same walls that once held hope now echo with despair. The same rooms that once saved lives now feel like tombs. It's as if you are stepping into the exact moment where life and death collided, and death took the victory. And human beings, whether we admit it or not, are obsessed with that collision. The fear of our own fragility. To enter an abandoned hospital is to confront your own vulnerability. The peeling paint, the rusted beds, the broken wheelchairs, they remind us of something we don't like to think about. One day, that could be us. We all live under the quiet terror of illness, the sudden diagnosis, the accident, the invisible thing in our blood or lungs that could betray us at any moment. Hospitals embody that fear. They are monuments to fragility. When they are abandoned, that fragility becomes even starker. The machines are silent. The doctors are gone. The walls are crumbling. There is no help here anymore. If something happens to you in this place, you are on your own. And that thought, whether we realize it or not, makes our pulse quicken. It pulls us closer. The shadow of cruelty. There is another layer too. Hospitals were not always sanctuaries, especially psychiatric hospitals, especially sanatoriums built at the turn of the century. Behind their locked doors, terrible things happened. Treatments that we now recognize as torture were once carried out in the name of medicine. Ice baths, electroshock, lobotomies. Patients strapped down, forgotten, discarded. When you stand in an abandoned ward, you can feel it. The cruelty is still there, imprinted in the very design of the building. Long, endless corridors. Small, windowless rooms. Doors that only lock from the outside. Part of our fascination comes from this knowledge. We are drawn to places where human suffering was not an accident, but a system. Where the line between healer and jailer blurred. Where compassion gave way to control. And when we walk those halls, we wonder, if we had lived then, could it have been us on those beds? Could we have been the ones who never made it out? The ghost in the brain psychologists call it the uncanny, the experience of something being both familiar and alien at the same time. Hospitals are the perfect example. We know them. We visited them. But when they're empty, silent, decayed, they twist into something wrong. Your brain fights with itself. Part of you says, this is a hospital, a place of order, a place where things make sense. Another part of you whispers, no, this is not right, this is broken, this is dangerous. That mental conflict is intoxicating. It keeps us locked in, unable to look away. It's the same reason horror movies work. The same reason ghost stories stick. The uncanny cracks something open in us, and once it's open, we can't close it. The allure of the forbidden. There's also the thrill of trespass. Most abandoned hospitals are off limits. The signs say, keep out. The fences warn of danger. The floors threaten collapse. But that only makes us want them more. There is something irresistible about the forbidden. Something that tells us, if you step inside, you will see what others are not meant to see. Every photograph taken in these places carries that forbidden energy. You know the person behind the camera crossed a line to capture it. You know you're seeing something you shouldn't, and that feeling of looking at something secret, hidden, dangerous, locks us in. Why the ghost stories stick. The ghost stories are not just entertainment. They are survival mechanisms. Humans tell stories to make sense of fear. When we hear a whisper in an empty room, we could say, it's just the wind. But that explanation doesn't stick. It doesn't comfort. It doesn't explain why the hair on our arms stood up, so we give it shape. A ghost. A nurse who never left. A child still searching for her mother. These stories transform raw terror into narrative, and once they're stories, they can be repeated, they can be shared, they can spread. That's why the ghost stories of abandoned hospitals echo louder than any others. They aren't just about spirits. They're about trauma. They're about pain that refuses to die. They're about us. The secret we don't admit. There's one more reason, though. One darker, quieter, harder to say out loud. We are drawn to these places because deep down, part of us wants to be scared. We crave it. Not just for adrenaline, not just for thrills, but because fear wakes us up. Modern life numbs us. We scroll, we watch, we wait. But when we walk into a place like Penhurst or Waverly Hills or Severals, everything sharpens. The air feels thicker. The shadows grow deeper. Every sound matters. Every breath feels heavy. In that fear, we are alive again. And though we may never admit it, that is why we return. That is why we cannot look away. That is why abandoned hospitals haunt us long after we've left. Because the truth is not that they are full of ghosts. The truth is that they awaken the ghosts inside us. Why we'll never stop. So why do we keep going back? Because abandoned hospitals are more than buildings. They are stages where human fragility, cruelty, fear, and hope all collided. They are museums of suffering. They are cathedrals of the uncanny. Every photograph, every video, every whispered story is a way of standing at that threshold again, between life and death, between order and chaos, between the known and the unknowable. And once you've stood there, once you've felt it, you can never fully walk away. The story of abandoned hospitals never really ends. You can walk through their halls, you can take your photographs, you can leave the gates behind you and breathe in the clean air of the outside world. But part of that place always comes with you. Think about it. Every abandoned hospital is a graveyard without tombstones. A place where thousands of lives began and thousands ended, and millions of moments in between were soaked into the walls. Those walls do not forget. They hold on. They keep repeating, whispering, bleeding into the present. We tell ourselves these are just ruins, empty buildings, nothing more. But then why does the silence inside them feel heavier than silence anywhere else? Why do we step inside and immediately feel watched? Why do our bodies stiffen, our breath shorten, our senses sharpen, as though we are prey entering a predator's den? Maybe it's because hospitals, more than any other place, hold our deepest fears. Fear of pain, fear of confinement, fear of losing control of our bodies, our minds, our very selves. Fear of death. Those fears never left. They linger like radiation, seeping into every floorboard, every wall, every broken window. And when we enter, they awaken. Perhaps that is why the ghost stories endure. Perhaps that is why explorers still return, why cameras still roll, why legends still spread. Not because we believe in spirits, but because we cannot resist staring into the reflection they offer. A reflection of everything we are terrified to face. Every abandoned hospital is a mirror. When you walk its halls, you are not just meeting the ghosts of others, you are meeting your own. And that is why, long after you've closed this video, long after you've moved on with your day, the images will still echo. The peeling walls, the shadow at the end of the hall, the door that shut when no one was near, because some places never let go. And once you have entered their story, even for a moment, you carry it with you.